Okay. Nigel Nit-Boy. Knits, knits, and more knits. Great big bush of hair. Mr. Henderson? How would a knit be called Mr. Henderson? I don't like the look of his eyes. So I'm wondering how he could be the world's worst children. Maybe he spreads knits to everyone. Let's find out. Nigel Nit-Boy. Wow, look at the picture. Knits are itchy. Knits are scratchy. Knits are scritchy. Knits are a nuisance. Not for Nigel. Nigel was a boy who could never have enough knits. He wanted his hair crawling with them. Our tale begins on the morning that Nigel woke up to discover he had a nit living in his hair. Most of us would be appalled and immediately try to evict the nit. Not Nigel. He was delighted. I'm thinking evict means to get rid of. You evict someone out of a house. The boy called this nit Mr. Henderson. Nigel didn't have a dog or a cat or a hamster, so he treated his nit like a pet. He made sure he never combed his hair. Nits hate combs. Soon Nigel's hair was wild and frizzy, like a great big bush. A jungle paradise for nits. Before, after. Big difference. Nigel fed Mr. Henderson titbits of dandruff. Nits love dandruff. In the hope of training him up to do tricks, like leaping from one side of Nigel's head to the other. Soon afterwards, Nigel heard of another child at school who had nits. Her name was Tina Ting. Nigel wanted Tina's nits more than anything in the world. He wanted nits, nits, and more nits. At break time, Nigel chased the poor girl round the playground. What do you want? Cried Tina tearfully. I'm not playing it. I want your nits, replied the boy. My nits? You are nuts, yelled the girl. Yes, I'm nuts for nits, said Nigel. The boy tripped over a skateboard and flew through the air towards her. Clonk! I love the word clonk. Their heads bashed, and in an instant, Tina's nits crawled over to Nigel's head. A little dazed, the boy was none the less happy. Now Mr. Henderson had some company. The next day, Nigel heard of a boy in school who had nits. Colin Clont. Nigel wanted those nits so badly, so he chased Colin down the corridor and cornered him in the toilets. Ugh. The trembling boy locked himself in a cubicle. But Nigel would not give up. He climbed over the top of the next cubicle and dangled himself upside down from the ceiling. Nigel and Colin's head knocked together. Bonk! Once again the Nit sprang across to Nigel's head. Even the school cat was not safe from Nigel's advances. When Nigel was told that Minky the cat also had nits, he pursued the poor creature across the football field. Once he'd caught the cat, he sellotape it, sticky taped it, to his head. It looked like a very unconvincing wig. Still, one by one, the cat's nits bounded onto Nigel's head. Soon, Nigel had so many nits that even his nits had nits. He stopped counting them at 1,000,003. Now, this means there's a bit of a break in the story. Time for some thinking. What in goodness is going on in his head? Not on his head, in his head. Now, you may be wondering why Nigel wanted a head full of nits. Please let me explain. Ever since he was a toddler, Nigel had spent his days reading comics. The boy was short for his age, if you don't count the wild bush of hair on top of his head, and he wanted to be strong and powerful, like the characters in his comics. However, Nigel had a very normal upbringing. He'd not been lucky enough to have been bitten by a radioactive spider, or come from a Viking planet, or fallen down a well of bats. Spider-Man, Thor, bats, Batman. Besides, he found superheroes a bit boring. They were always doing good. The supervillains were so much more thrilling. Before long, naughty Nigel had a plan. One morning, as the boy was standing in the bathroom cleaning his teeth, he looked at himself in the mirror. His hair was now not so much a bush, more of a hedgerow. Like a big hedge. Nigel could not remember the last time he'd either cut or combed it. Look at it. What a great illustration. Buzzing in and out of this hedgerow of hair were billions of nits, forming a dark cloud around him. The day has finally come. My nit-based superpower is ready. From this day on, the world will know me only as Nit-Boy. Best of all, the name hadn't already been taken. Wonder why. So now that Nigel had all his nits, he went about getting a costume made. Fortunately, the boy's Auntie Pat was quite good at sewing and put together a supervillain costume for her nephew in no time. Nigel wore a cape fashioned from one of his mum's skirts. The NB logo for Nit-Boy was sewn by his Aunt Pat, like the labels. His Nana's tights. They look like they're pretty loose. Wellington boots. But more importantly, his dad's old Y-fronts. Underpants. Nigel had his superpower. He had his name. His costume was on. He was Nit-Boy. At once he began his super villainy. Super villainy. I wonder what he's planning to do. The next morning he strode into school, his cape flapping in the wind. First, Nigel vowed to get revenge on his geography teacher, Mr. Drumhum. Nigel found geography boring and spent most of his lessons reading comic books. Mr. Drumhum had given the boy detention after detention, which meant he was kept in after school. Now, Nit-Boy stood at the door to the classroom. Initially, which means at first, there were hoots of laughter from the other children. I think I would have laughed. What was his costume and shrubland of hair? The would-be supervillain did look quite a sight. However, the laughter turned to silent awe as Nit-Boy called out his first command. Nits! Swarm! The billions of nits that were whirling around his head formed a black mass next to him. Nigel, what on earth do you think you are doing? Demanded Mr. Drumhum. Nits, attack! Shouted the boy. They swarmed the geography teacher, nipping him all over with tiny nit claws. Ah! Screamed Mr. Drumhum as he raced out of the classroom. All his pupils pressed their faces up against the windows to watch their teacher. The man was trying desperately to fend off the nits. He was hopping and spinning and slapping himself as he sped across the playing field towards the school pond. Mr. Drumhum then leaped in with a giant splosh. He finally had some relief from the nips, though now he was submerged in a green water with a fat frog sitting on his head. Nit-Boy smiled to himself. This was going to be fun. I wonder who's next. I can see someone, but I wonder who she is. Next, he marched across the playground to the dining hall. The dinner lady, Mrs. Droop, was something of a dragon. Boiled broccoli, yucko, was her signature dish. So he's at a school where they are given their lunch. When whatever you chose, even jam, roly-poly and custard, Mrs. Droop would spoon heaps of her green, watery mush on top. Ugh. Then she would stalk up and down the dining tables, twirling her ladle. Once you get the soup out, like a baton, threatening to wrap the knuckles of anyone who didn't eat up every last mouthful. Nigel hated broccoli. If Superman feared kryptonite, Nit-Boy was terrified of broccoli. Now he was to have his revenge on the woman who made him eat a mountain of it. "Nigel?" she purred as he strode in. "Why have you got your pants on over your trousers?" "Ha ha 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 ha!" Mrs. Droop's smile was wiped off her face as soon as Nit-Boy shouted out his next command. "Nits! To the broccoli!" "I'm not having your blasted head lice messing with my delicious broccoli," protested the dinner lady. Too late. The nits had swarmed into a swirling tornado. Mrs. Droop stood open-mouthed in shock as the twisting vortex spun over to her precious trays of broccoli. Then the tornado started firing the damp, limp vegetable straight at Mrs. Droop. Splat! 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 Soggy floret after soggy floret splattered across the woman's face until Mrs. Droop was a damp, green, vegetable-y mess. Ugh. Maybe she deserved it a bit, though. I'm starting to think Mr. Humdrum might have deserved a bit too. So now I'm not sure about Nigel Nit-Boy. What do you think? Is he a worse child? Or does he have a little bit of right to get some revenge? Interesting.